Left-handed.
I'm Charlotte Vincent, so I'm the person who has organised this series of workshops, of which this is the first. I've done risk assessments for Birdwood, so if you want to read them, you're very welcome to. And the basics are wrap up warm, don't hurt yourself, uneven ground. When using a spade, don't jump on it, just press on it. We'll have to get hardy people to start off with the digging, I think. And we do have various bits of kit that will be available to use, so decent gloves. If you're using the post ram, I've got hard hats available. So in case you've forgotten why you're actually here today, this is the first of the series of orchard management workshops. They're organised by Severn Treescapes project, but we're funded, and a big thank you to the Wye Valley National Landscape Farming and Protected Landscapes Fund. So this one is the Orchard Planning and Planting Workshop, and will be led by Martin Hayes, who is due to become very famous because he's going on Country File soon. And he's a trustee of Gloucestershire Orchard Trust and an all-round traditional orchard guru. A little bit about the Severn Treescapes project. That project is hosted by Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, but it does cross the 3 counties of Gloucestershire, Herefordshire and Worcestershire. So a couple of the workshops will also be held in Herefordshire. And it aims to increase the connectivity across the landscape by increasing tree cover in the 60-mile corridor between the Wye Valley and the Wye Forest to create better connected habitats and landscapes and landscape scale tree planting. And what's a tree? A tree includes hedge plants, field trees, corners, copses, riparian habitats, whole woodlands and, of course, orchards. Orchards are important on so many levels. They provide a crossover land use between grassland and woodland, and so achieve benefits for both the landowner and farmer, for wildlife and the wider community, being landscape, sense of place, and also fruit pies and cider.
So a half standard is basically, it's a farming term. A half standard is you run sheep underneath and your tree is 5 foot, your starts, the branch is at 5'6". Okay? Full standard, you're running cattle underneath, 7'6". That's what that terminology means. So if you buy a tree and it says half standard and it's on an M25 rootstock, which is a big one, and you put it in your patio flower bed, it's going to be a massive full-on tree. And a lot of people, especially landscape architects, make that mistake. Okay, so it's really important to differentiate between standards and the rootstocks, because the rootstock is the most important part of your tree. So there's generally, if I go through the apple rootstocks, and it's a little bit confusing because sometimes the numbers go up and down, up and down. And basically the only reason for that is the fact that when they're in the tunnels, measuring how they grow, number 9 is M9, M25 is number 25, and M26 is, and that's generally all it is. So the numbers are a little bit confusing. And so, and again, some landscape architects I've known have bought an M25 thinking it's smaller than an M26, where in fact it's the other way around. So this is really important to know. And you can get that information from Frank Matthews, growers. Walcott Organic Nursery do a lovely little picture of trees and the sizes of them, whether they're vigorous, semi-vigorous, semi-dwarfing, dwarfing, very dwarfing, with somebody stood next to them, or a picture of somebody, a drawing of somebody stood next to them, to show you how big they will grow. And they're all, so if you're in a block of flats in the middle of London, and you get 6 hours of sunlight in a day, in the ripening time, you can grow an apple tree in a bucket there. There is a rootstock for almost every situation you're in. And so if we start with the biggest trees, and M25s, generally if there's any farmers here, M25, if you're going to go for a grant scheme, the M25 is the one they want you to use. And that's the biggest tree you'll get in an orchard. And it'll grow to about 25 foot. Okay, and so I suppose stepping back a bit, you know the rootstocks, you get your rootstock, and I'm not swearing at you, but that's the rootstock. You get your scion, it's very crude, and you attach your variety to your rootstock, and then that grows, your variety's there, and the rootstock determines how big your tree will get. Okay. There is bud grafting as well, which is a far superior way of doing it, and it's much better weather. It's very sunny and warm at that time of year. They do that in August, whereas grafting They're going to start soon. And you could imagine doing grafting in this weather, it's freezing cold. So that's how, that's basically the science behind that. You just glue them together, in effect, and you put something around them to protect them, to stop them drying out, like they use stretch and seal nowadays. Back in the day, we'd use a wax, grafting wax. But now stretch and seal does just the same job. So the rootstocks that we've got, if we start with apple, then M25 is the biggest rootstock, and that is a vigorous tree. And again, when you're planting your tree, and out there you'll see an M25, and anything with the name vigorous in it, if it's semi-vigorous or vigorous, you don't have to support. You don't have to put a stake in to support it. Now, they will tell you, if you're in Natural England, if you're on one of their CS schemes, they will tell you that you need to stake it. If you stake a tree, a vigorous tree, it's likely that it might fall over. Because the biggest thing after, there's loads of big things, you have to have that tree, has to get the root system prepared straight away. And if you've got a solid stake with a big strap on it, it isn't going to move. The tree needs to move to excite the roots. Yeah? And if it doesn't move and it doesn't excite the roots, the tree will get a whole load of apples and it could just keel over. So the M25 is a vigorous one, and as I say, that's a CS. They actually, you have to have those trees. The next one down is what called an MM106. And the MM106 is a semi-vigorous tree. Malling, East Malling down in Kent is where they did all this research, and they invented, what's the word? They grew all these rootstocks. They did all the research for them. MM106 semi-vigorous, a fantastic tool for getting varieties, old varieties in people's gardens, you know, because that's what we want. We want that spread of genetic material as far and wide as we can, and the MM106 is a brilliant tool for that. So the MM106 is semi-vigorous, so again, it's quite capable of standing up on its own. It doesn't need to be staked at all, just a cane through the rabbit guard to give it a little bit of support. And there's a tie that you get, which is like a rose tie. It's a tie, it looks a bit like an electric cable, but without the wire in the middle, and you just tie it up. It's got a breaking strain, so if you forget, when you've planted your 2,500 trees and you forget to go and untie them, it will just snap and it will be fine. So then you come down to what we call, is the semi-dwarfing, and that's an M26, semi-dwarfing. So I wouldn't recommend an M26, an M27 or M9. Let's forget the M9s, M26 or M27. I wouldn't recommend them in any fields, in any kind of planting, orchard planting. Generally garden trees, really. The M9, which is a very specific one that they grow in Herefordshire on wires. You see them, these orchards just growing on wires, and they're about 1.5 meters apart. They're about 6 foot, 7 foot tall. And they have to be supported all their life as well. But they are very good in a garden situation because they are very narrow, so you can get more trees in of the different varieties. And which is very important, but we'll come on to that in a bit. So where were we? We're on the M26. And then you come down to garden trees, M27, which is has to be staked all its life. It can't stay upright on its own. Has to be kept down to 6 foot. You can't let it grow to anything more than that because it will get top heavy and fall over. And then there's the M9. Now there are other rootstocks, but they're the most popular ones. And then you do get rootstocks that are good for wetlands. They're good rootstocks that are good for dry lands. So the commercial industry are forever coming out with this new stuff, and it's really good to follow the commercial boys because they're the innovators. They're going to come out with the rootstocks that are disease resistant, that are drought resistant and all that. So it's very interesting, the stuff they're coming out. And if you look at some of the stuff on Frank Matthews' website and you look down at the rootstocks and they're V15658 and it's just mind-boggling, and they all do different things, which is just incredible, really. So that's the apples. So is there anything I need to say about the rootstocks on them?
Can I just ask something? So you said these are the standard ones that have been in place a long time, but there's always new research being done to address various issues, whether it's waterlogging or disease or whatever. So would you suggest that, when you're planting a big orchard, obviously you need to know the site conditions, so you would pick what's best. So what's the best way? Would you say that you need to have somebody to advise as to?
Not necessarily. I think that if you know you're in a quite a wet area, then you'd be thinking about getting a rootstock that, I've got to get this right, because that spreads so that it covers a wide area. Or you get, if it's not so wet, you get another rootstock that goes further down to find the root. So I've got a feeling, and I think it's the M25 that goes further down, and the M11 that spreads out. So that is generally in an orchard, in a field, if it's pasture, the ground's going to be fine. Your most overwhelming thought is on the top of the Cotswolds, for instance, where nobody's ever grown an orchard because it's too windy, it's too cold, and they're never going to survive. If your ground has got real brash, you have to sort of be aware of that, and you have to break through that brash when you plant your tree so that your roots can get down there. But generally, as a rule, if it's pasture land, orchards do fine in that. It's just the environment above ground that you've got to worry about, really. Frost pockets and high up where it's really cold. So when we go back to standards and half standards, an M25, and I'm only talking about the most common ones that you probably would come across. The M25, you can prune that, or you can cut that back as a half standard, as I said before, to run sheep, 5'6", or a full standard at 7'6". Okay. If you come down to an MM106, you can only do a half standard. You can't do a full standard, otherwise it gets top heavy. So it's a half standard, yeah. If you've got, if you're in a garden and you plant a MM106 and you've got no sheep or deer problems, you can do first branches just above your knee. And in fact, your M9s and your M27, that's where you want to start them, just above your knee. Because any higher than that, the tree starts to get a bit unstable. Does that all make sense, that bit? I don't know why, but in Suffolk, a half standard is 4 foot and a full standard is 6 foot. I got a feeling they probably got dwarfing things there. I don't know, but it's a bit weird. Maybe it's very soggy ground, so they sink and they haven't got them. I don't know. So that's very important. Full standard and half standard for an M25. Half standard only for an M106. Anything lower than that is staked and is from your knee. Yeah. And then you come on to the plums. And we've got plums here. The plums, the biggest one you'll get is called a Brompton. A bit like the bicycle, I think. Spelt like the bicycle, Brompton. That's vigorous. That can be standard and half standard. And then there's Julian A, which is a semi-vigorous. And the Julian A is really great for orchards. Unfortunately, under CS schemes, and hopefully that might change in the future, they don't allow you to plant them. They want you to plant the Brompton, the biggest tree. Because the bigger the tree, the older they get, the more of the sap runs, of the dead wood and all that sort of stuff you get. And it's just a much more wildlife friendly a lot further down the line, whereas the smaller the rootstock, they don't last so long. Still very important, but they don't last as long, especially the 106. It's very important, but it hasn't got the lifespan of the M25. And then there's Pixie and other things that go in buckets. Smaller rootstock. Pixie is a very small garden one. Pears, you get Pyrus communis, and I never know how to say it, but it's like Krückensal, or maybe it's a German name. Has anybody heard that? Peri-pear? No? Krückensal. Krückenseller. I'll have to get back to you on that one because I can never say it. I can't even spell it. I think it's Krenseller. Krückenseller. And they're the big rootstocks. And on peri-pears, of course, they will grow to 25, 30 foot. So you've got to be really aware of where you put these trees, because if you put them in the wrong place, you're likely to have your building down or your wall down or or something like that. So, so Perry pears obviously, you know, last for 300 years, a fantastic beast, very, very common in Gloucestershire. And then you come down to a quince rootstocks, and that's semi-vigorous is a quince A, and dwarfing is a quince C. You know that your tree is going to grow in the environment that it's in, it's going to go to the size you want it, and all that, and we'll get to spacings later. So now we're going to go into choosing the varieties, and it depends really what you want to do. So when I go to do a consultancy on a farm, the first thing most of them say to me, I want to grow cider trees. Because of course there's a bit of a renaissance in cider and artisan, so there's a lot of people started going into, and straight away my alarm bells start ringing and say, look, you know, think about something to go along with it. You can't just put cider trees in, because if you just put cider trees in, and what if the cider industry changes and people aren't that interested in cider anymore? And one of the biggest things I find is that with cider, 10% of the population might like cider, and probably only 5% would do it regularly, drink cider regularly, and only 10% of that 10% or that 5% actually will like the cider you make. So it's like a real kind of tricky one. So what I talk to them about is putting in apple juice in, as well. So apple juice, you can press it on 20th of August, say, and you can be selling it on the 21st. With cider, you're picking it on and you're waiting 3 months.
Do you advise people to go for trees pertaining to their area so it actually preserves that species of tree for that area?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jane, because I'm telling you now, you haven't got many from this area. Because the trees that we get from where I get them from, I get what they give me. That's basically it. Yes, to a certain degree, but I'm going to be honest with you that most of the Gloucestershire varieties taste like shit. They seriously do. I mean, the reason why they planted them in the past is because we salted all our food. So any apple tasted quite sweet and nice. Now all our food is sweet. So all those apples taste really sour, and some people like them, a lot of people don't. But what you have to think about is what is going to be good for you. So if you're not bothered about growing for any particular reason, and you're buying your trees in, by all means go for Gloucestershire varieties. There's loads out there. All of the commissions I do, they're all Gloucestershire varieties. They'll be next year. And they are rarer ones, so that's quite nice to have that rare bank. But if you want an apple to eat and you want sort of a crop that you can do something with, then you really have to think about what you're going to buy. And generally, the Gloucestershire varieties that we have, and it's really worth looking into because the DNA testing are throwing a lot of them out. Apples that we thought were Gloucestershire are now Worcestershire or Herefordshire, or they come from Russia or somewhere like that. So that we're losing a lot. We lost 30 in the last round of DNA testing, and as they refine it, they're starting to find that some of them are very duplicated around the world. So we've only got 79 left, basically. So it's still a lot. It's still a lot. And also, if you've got an apple that isn't now, and it's got that name on it, keep the name, because if it was founded in Gloucester, if somebody discovered it in Gloucestershire and didn't know that somebody had one in Russia, then it's still a valid Gloucestershire apple, in my opinion. But the DNA testing are very specific, and they really dig down into it. So my name's Martin Hayes. I am with the Gloucestershire Orchard Trust. We're doing a orchard planting here of pear, apple and plum and cherry, and all for biodiversity. The project is run by, is financed by the Gloucestershire County Council, is supplying all the materials and the trees, and Gloucestershire Orchard Trust is supplying myself to do this job. It's all about biodiversity net gain, which is really buzzword at the moment, or buzz phase at the moment. We are trying to increase the amount of, the amount of biodiversity, but the amount of wildlife and things that love living in an orchard. We've got lots of volunteers here. We've got the Wildlife Trust, the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, are here, and they're here. They got a project run by FIPL, Farming in Protected Landscapes, and Severn Treescapes, I believe. So there's a few different types of organisations involved in it. It's a big project happening all over the county and in other counties, I'm sure, but Gloucestershire is really forging ahead with this sort of stuff. And I'm planting all over Gloucestershire, 550 trees. Doesn't sound a lot, but when you're talking about the robust guards we have to put in, it's quite an undertaking. And today we've got volunteers, and tomorrow we're going to be doing the same again with other volunteers. This land is Jane Evans. It's her land. It's called Nirvana, and it's in Birdwood in Gloucestershire, so it's on the edge of the Forest of Dean, really. You probably see the Forest of Dean in the background there. And we're planting 40 trees in here. And the guards that we're putting up are against the sheep eating the trees, because they love a fruit tree. And they've got alpacas in here, and also we're worried about deer as well. And I think they've got a problem with badgers. So this is good stuff.